Oh. Hello, everybody. Let me unmute myself. Okay, welcome everybody. Can you all hear me and Gaynell just right?
Hello,
at home?
everybody.
I know you all can hear us here in person. Okay, great. We got a thumbs up. We're good to go. Okay, welcome. I want to welcome everybody here in person. Thank you so much for coming out to Gaynell's presentation today. This is Gaynell Brady. She's the owner and educator at Our Mammies and a longtime friend of the City Archives, which is who I work for. I'm Amanda Fallis and I work at the City Archives at New Orleans Public Library. We're excited to have you all for this hybrid program. And this is Gaynell's first presentation back in person with us. So we are really excited to have her here. If everybody wants to clap in person. Thank you. With that being said, I am so excited to hear about the story of her African American World War II veteran, a family legacy and a family history. And I am going to be quiet now and let Gaynell take it away.
So full disclosure, I'll tell you a little bit about my background and you'll see why I'm such a, I guess you could say, a curious person. So for a number of years, I worked as a museum educator at the Louisiana State Museum, National World War II Museum, the River Road African American Museum, and I spent about 4 or 5 years as an interpretive park ranger for the National Park Service. As you could tell, I put on a lot of hats. But that's not the big part of how I got into this. I've always been like a curious kid, and my parents are in the background. They could tell you like, yes, she is one that's going to ask the questions. And in return, I have a son that turns around and asks me all of the questions now. So that's really what the world of genealogy is all about, right? It's simply trying to find out your family's history. But the piece that I want to emphasize on today to the people in this room, you're here for a reason. How many of you in the room have documented your own story? Bits and pieces. So your homework, if you haven't, is to do so. The reason why I say that, especially to my dad who got on me earlier about not documenting his story, and I told him to write it himself. Because nobody can tell your story like you can, right? I can help research and pull up documents if they exist. Many of our family members are in rural communities, so sometimes the rules were a little bit different for those communities. So now, as a result of that, I have to pull the information that I can find to try to piece together someone's story. If they would have had the opportunity to write it down, it would have been a little bit easier for me. Sometimes our ancestor stories are attached to the church history. So if your family stood involved in the church for a long period of time, it's easy to pull that information. You know how the church moved, they move with the church. However, if you had a relative, similar to me, who goes by the church, not so much in the church, you're gonna have a little bit more difficult time. So I would encourage you to tell your own story. You don't want anyone else telling your story. With that being said, I'm gonna dive into my paternal grandfather's life. And the reason why I'm emphasizing on him, because I actually learned about myself by studying him. And I also understood why my dad is structured the way that he is by studying my grandfather. As you can tell, this is my dad. Most of the information that we get about our grandparents come from our parents, right? So a lot of the information that I knew about my grandfather was from my dad. But even then, my dad didn't have a long period of time to spill my grandfather. So all of the information that we need, we didn't have it, right? And then a lot of times there's pain attached to those stories of the past, so they don't want to share them. But what I do know about my grandfather is that from my dad is how much my grandfather loved Christmas, right? And how important Christmas was to him and to his family. And of course, Christmas is my favorite holiday. I remember building with my mom and my dad, we built like this little train set for my brother, took up an entire living room and a whole weekend to do it. But it was all around spending time with family. And that's similar to what my grandfather did. The other thing that I know personally about my grandfather is my grandmother and my grandfather had a house in Pontchartrain Park. And I remember going into my grandmother's living room, her little den, and I would see this wedding photo of her and my grandfather. And then I would see the swing in the backyard. And then I would listen to people talk about my grandfather, kind of like my son does, grabbing bits and pieces, but I'm talking about a kid versus an adult now who's really interested. right? So this is pretty much what I knew about my grandfather. I also knew just from family, knowing my relatives, that my grandmother and my grandfather had 13 children. I have a ton of cousins. So my dad, one of 13, my mom, one of 19. So I have a ton of cousins in New Orleans, in Louisiana specifically. My grandfather was born in Glynn, Louisiana. How many of you know where Glynn is? She did research on my grandfather. Okay, so here's the deal. So my grandfather lived in Glynn, Louisiana. He lived in Point Capee Parish. Both sides of his family pretty much came from the same area. I know that he worked for the Glynn family for multiple generations. A lot of our family land is still attached across the street around the corner from the Glynn family. Most of my family members that I know of, for the most part, they're all buried in St. Mark's Cemetery. The earlier ones are buried in cemeteries that are no longer here. They were lost to the river. So my dad told me also about my grandfather that he was a short, kind of muscular guy, right? Very fit. He was a hard worker. He believed in his sons working to provide for other members of the family. So each son would take care of a daughter, right? And so thinking about all of that, just keep that in mind when we dig into my grandfather's story. So they were working as sharecroppers in Glynn, Louisiana. Because they were in a rural community, and as I could tell, my grandfather's a short guy, he spoke and demanded respect, but he gave it to other people as well. Just a hardworking person. Sounds typical to a lot of our grandfathers, right? Here comes the part that gets a little different. So on February 23rd, 1975, my parents and my grandfather went out for drinks on Dryas Street, right? And so at this time, my dad and my mom, they was out late. You know, it's New Orleans, right? As Amanda says, this is why we're always late for stuff. We're out the night doing things before. So my grandfather told my mom to take my dad home and let him get some rest. And that's all I knew about my grandfather. So naturally, I had so many questions. Who was Kelly Banks? Also learned from my uncle, he was called Drake, also known as Cary Banks. All of these different names. So I'm like, what is going on with my grandpa? So what I do know, after doing a little bit of research, my grandfather was born Cary Clifford. And he was born either on August 3rd, 1924, August 24th, 1923, August 24th, 1924. You see what's happening here, right? Typical? Right? So this is a field in Glynn, Louisiana. My great aunt Alice, her and her husband Joe owned a bar room across the street from this field. So when I looked up my grandfather, I had a hard time. Not because I didn't know what I knew, but just finding him on a document. And if she, like she said, she researched him. So there are bits and pieces that are missing. Like I can't find him on a 1940 census. Could you find him on a 1940 census? So I had to substitute, right? So my dad didn't really know my grandmother's maiden name. And I'm going to show you why in a moment. So here's my grandfather's obituary. Now, let's be honest. If you're doing family research and you find an obituary, let me pick someone in the audience. What's the first thing that you do when you get it?
Well, I used to see how they died.
Used to see how they died. Because
They don't say that anymore.
they don't say that anymore, right? And then another thing that you do is you look for the family members, right? So me, naturally, yay, I saw Rebecca, but I did not pay attention to the middle name. I did not pay attention to Clifford, right? So I'm looking for Rebecca Banks, and I'm like, what is going on? I cannot find her. I did not pay attention to Clifford. I did everything else that you guys said. I saw all of the names and I recognized all of these. These are my aunts and uncles, great aunts and uncles. Oh, okay, I know these people. I paid attention to where they worked, right? And so it's like, but I did not see Rebecca Clifford Banks. And for this reason, this PowerPoint exists. Because I stopped going all the way up to the 1500s with Elba de Queer, that's one of my ancestors, and said we're going to park it and we're going to go back and we're really going to do a deep dive into some of these people's lives. So when I went to my dad, me being me, asking my dad what he knew about Grandma Rebecca, and he really didn't know Grandma Rebecca was Clifford, right? He did recall my grandma Bernice calling my grandfather Cary. So when you take your time and go back to the same document again, you see that Clifford. And if you search for Rebecca Clifford, you see Cary Clifford. And then you realize, well, wait a minute. Grandpa changed his name, or someone changed his name phonetically, or grandpa changed his name for a reason. Something I'll never know. 1930 census, you see grandpa living with his parents, with his siblings. You also see the rest of the Banks family living on the same row. Most of my relatives in Glynn, Louisiana, and all of the other small towns, St. Francisville, Des Salmons, wherever you put us, even in the lower ninth ward of New Orleans, you're gonna find us all stacked up together, right? That's just how my family rolled in Louisiana. I can find on the 1930 census, I am related to 95% of the people on this list. And that's simply because the Bankses married the Browns, who married the Francois, who married the Fabres, who married the DeQueers. So as you can tell, my DNA is constantly doing this. It's a web that I cannot take apart, right? So as my friend told you, when it comes to the 1940 census, I couldn't find my grandfather. So what I did was I looked more into my grandma, Rebecca. I did take a DNA test. Now, let me do a little bit of a disclaimer. When you take a DNA test, once you take that lid off, you cannot put it back on. It's over. So I learned then, even though my grandmother Rebecca was a Clifford, her biological father was a Coates. I got relatives in the room. Okay. So his grandmother, great-grandmother was Classy Nixon. All of these Cliffords and Nixons and Browns, they were all sharecroppers on the same land in St. Francisville, Louisiana, which is West Feliciana Parish, and also in Point Capite and West Baton Rouge Parish. Other thing I learned about Grandma Lizzie was that she was a midwife in West Feliciana Parish. Even to this day, I can recall like taking some little mixtures of stuff versus cough syrup to get rid of the common cold. But the other thing that I learned about my grandfather that came from later documents was that his mom died when he was 11 years old. Many of his relatives died in 1920s from typhoid fever. When I started pulling those death certificates, like you said, cause of death, typhoid fever in Point Capite Parish. In fact, 3 out of my grandma Classy's, 3 out of her 23 kids died of typhoid fever in 1925. Her face went, what? How many kids? 23. And you see them on those death certificates. I also pay attention to who gave that information because I need to kind of verify that. I'm finding, I remember one time my Uncle Clay and I were having a discussion about death certificates and birth certificates. Birth certificates are a little bit more reliable, except for the daddy part, right? Remember the rule, mama baby, papa maybe, right? But the death certificate is only as good as the information as the person who gave it. And a lot of times I find, even on the news, the person who knows the least grabs the mic. You know what I mean? So that's why I say write your own story. So Grandpa Kelly's dad also died a couple of years before his mom. So as a young child, he lost both parents. Think about extended family dying of typhoid fever, sharecropping, only a 3rd grade education, and siblings. So this is my grandfather. I told you about the both parents, England, 1920. His wife is also living on that same row. Remember I mentioned earlier, the Bankses marrying the Francois. When I got this record from the National Archives, it showed me that, oh, my grandfather was born in Glynn, Louisiana. Here's what I didn't know. One of his brothers, George King, was a half brother. Now I'm gonna let out a family secret. This is being recorded. Okay. When I took that DNA test, I found that my dad also had some half siblings. I'll leave it at that. When I look at my grandfather's records, you see the color, you see his name, you see Kelly Banks. So how we go from Cary Clifford to Kelly Banks by the time of this document, which was in 1942. So I have a time period in which that little shift happened. I know his dad was Robert Banks. I get that, but I don't know what happened with the name. The cool thing about my grandfather, I saw that he went into the CC camp in December 10th, 1941, and he signed up for a period of 6 months. The thing that I couldn't understand was, why did he go there? At the moment when all of your parents are dying, why did you choose this? And this document revealed that answer. So first thing I saw was he sent money to his brother George, and he was sending money to his sister, Florida. He sent the majority of his money to his siblings throughout his service. And the one part that gets me the most about my grandfather, he said the reason he joined was to support himself and help his brothers and sisters. And he could have chose to be selfish. He could have chosen to, I'm gonna take my money and get out. He took his money and went back. He sent his money there to help them. And in my mind, even the work that my grandfather did that's revealed on his records, and you could get this from the National Archives, it showed me that, again, he worked for the Glynn family, he worked for the people in Rougon, but his work was hard work. He cut sugarcane, he loaded hay, he dug potatoes. These are the things that I wanted to know about him, but I didn't have anything to do it until I got this document. And it tells you like how long he did this. And if you look at it, if you think about it, my grandfather born in 1924, 1941, he's still doing this kind of work with a limited education. But I didn't say that he wasn't smart. He didn't have that formal education, right? So when I saw that things that he was interested in, my grandfather, and I don't think my dad saw this, my grandfather said he was interested in truck driver and carpentry. Dad, what do you do? And most of your brothers, carpenters. And when I dug some more on my dad's family history, apparently my dad comes from all carpenters and engineers. And that's what my brother does. That's why he's not here today. He's somewhere working. But it shows like, even though my grandfather didn't get to see everything, he still lives on within us, right? So that's why I was like, man, this guy is powerful. This is my grandma. Grandma's family, old Louisiana family. If you've done Louisiana history, you know some of these names are old Louisiana names. And if you're on your tree, anybody have any of these names on your tree? Francois de Queers? Heard of them. They've been in Louisiana since the early 1700s. And because of that, it makes us cousins with a lot of people in New Orleans, like Gumbo Marie, Oliver Thomas, all de Queers. And it's simply because we all come from one man that came down here, right? So it makes us all cousins. And then the bad part is a lot of these people intermarried. So I can't separate it out, but they have roots anywhere from New Roads, Alexandria, all the way to New Orleans. So my grandma's side of the family was super easy, right? I get to a line of free people of color and it just took off. But my grandpa was different. I got his World War II record. You see that birthday thing again? August 24, 1923 this time. Shows Glynn, Emma Lewis, shows that he's working for the Glynn family. So in order for me to understand who my grandfather worked for, I had to actually research the Glynn family as well. It's something that happens when you do African American history. You have to research both sides. And the cool thing, I love to see his signature on stuff. And I love that because it shows me my grandpa could read and write. I forgot to mention, the Glynn family owns 7 plantations in West Baton Rouge and Point Capee parishes, and my family worked on all of them. On here, it gives his height, also shows that he worked, Charlie Glynn, he owned the plantation 1872, 1960 is his life. My grandpa registered for World War II on June 30th, 1942. The Glynn family owned many things in Glynn, Louisiana. They managed the post office and a lot of other, there was a sheriff's, they pretty much ran the town, right? But my family worked for this family well into the 80s. This is another document that I got, and there was some cool stuff on here. So my brother, the fun thing that my brother first thought was my grandfather's thumbprint. And he kind of joked like, hey, Gaynell, you have the bank's hands. I didn't get those, right? So, but the other thing that I love is that it showed me the campaigns that my grandfather fought in, right? Like that meant a lot to me. But I found this stuff out after I left the National World War II Museum. So now I'm on a quest to learn more about these campaigns themselves. I know that he served in Rhineland, and I know that he served in Northern France. And he was inducted into the Army on August 23rd, 1942. So again, you can imagine what Grandpa was doing with his money. I do know from his records, he did receive this medal, and I did the weird thing. I went on eBay and I bought it. And yes, I knew I could have ordered it from the other place that you get the headstones from, but like I told somebody, I wanted something that was used and had some energy attached to it, right? And so I do know that my grandfather, he received the highest grade, private first class, which was pretty good considering his background and where he came from. So most proud of him for doing so. I can tell you just some stories I heard from my dad that my grandfather said when he went to Europe, it was just different for him. He saw how African Americans should be treated, and he saw that we were treated better in Europe than when he came home. So when he came home, his mindset was a little bit different. And my grandfather worked in like a complex company. He was in decontamination. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you were risking your life. You don't know what kind of biohazard material that you were dealing with and then what kind of materials you came home with in your system. But nevertheless, he did it. And apparently he did it well to receive that promotion. So by October 18, 1945, he left the military. Basically, he went to the center at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. But when he came home, again, with the education he received from the military, you know how that happens. Experience plus education makes a man unfit to do certain things. And so when he came home, he was about, no, I have to make things better for my sons. I don't want them to use the manual labor in that way, use skilled labor, right? So that you could get paid well. And so he really just, he knew that we had the mental capacity, right? Like, and it's in our DNA. We can't help it. Here comes some stuff, and I won't say it, but you're going to figure it out. So while Kelly was gone away to Europe, he had a son born in 1944. She just figured it. Yeah, y'all figured it out. Okay. I had to give you a moment. Did my audience at home? Okay, you guys figured it out. I'll leave it there. Remember I told you DNA doesn't lie, but your granny did? Okay, so when he came home, they did shopping at Arbor Plantation store. And at this time, a lot of the people who worked on Louisiana's plantations, they were still not being paid in cash. So it's a system created to keep you enslaved, along with other systems that they put in place, convict leasing and everything else. That's a different presentation. However, my grandpa was like, no, we're not going to have another generation working on this land. This is it. He had his daughter with my grandma Bernice in 1946. He was just like, we're tired of this cabin. It's time to go. If we want to make a life better for the next generation, it's time to go. So in 1947, they left Glynn while my dad was in my grandmother's belly. And so my dad, if you think about it, was pretty much the first child that was not born on a plantation. Let that sink for a moment. The first child on my direct line that wasn't on my paternal direct line that was not born on a plantation. Again, this whole row here on the back of St. Mark's Church, that's where most of my family is buried, but that's the land. And that land just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. 1947, you see, and this is the wrong document. I must have put up the wrong presentation. Anyway, 1947, you see this, my grandparents living in Baton Rouge, Old South Baton Rouge. They were there for a short time until they moved to New Orleans. By 1950, Grandpa made it to Cluett Street. He's living there with some other people, but if you find a lot of African Americans, when we came to the city, in order to survive, we had to stay with other people. Stay tuned, that's gonna happen again with the rising cost of housing. That's the only way we're gonna be able to survive. We're gonna have to start growing our own food, sharing, and sharing housing. He had 2 sons by grandma. I don't know where the oldest son was, don't ask me. You about figure that out. And I'm not sure where my aunt was at this time. Still trying to figure that out. But he did have 2 of the sons with him in New Orleans in 1950. So that was this document. It shows that Kelly, Bernice, Charles, and Henry were all living with another family. At some point, they moved to Elver Street in a Desire Housing Project. It was great living at that time. My grandfather was also working at Gulf Engineering. And they were living at 2633 Louisa Street. This company was located at 1000 South Peters. And at some point they moved to Renee Street off of Chef. Each time my grandfather's moving, trying to get the family in a better neighborhood, in a better position. September 20th, 1959, my grandpa was, listen, that's where my strength to hustle comes from watching what the old folks did. He worked and they were able to put down $800, imagine that, and buy a house in Pontchartrain Park for $12,500. The kids all were transferred to Cog Hill Elementary School. Priority shifting, right? Like, this is what we're gonna do, and this is how we're gonna live. He also required that, remember I told you, his sons take care of the girls. So the boys worked, they went to school and worked. My grandpa at this point was working at Bayreuth National Lead Company. He walked to work each day, 2.7 miles. I can't even walk a mile, but he did 2.7 each way and worked every day. I wanted to learn more about the company, looked it up. Genealogy Bank was my friend. And I pulled up different articles on this company, did the same thing with my maternal ancestors when they said that they worked at Mother's Pies. I pulled up as much as I could on the pie company, and I looked for anything that was attributed to this company because I knew my ancestors were the reason they were so successful. My dad told me my grandfather filled 2,500 bags per hour. He filled more bags than anyone else. Dad, what'd you say he called them? What they called them? Clubfoot? No, not what was in the bag. What they called Grandpa at the job? Bigfoot. 2,500 bags per hour. And my dad said folks had to work twice as hard just to keep up with him with the pallets. Like, little person, just determined, right? Like, no, if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna be the very best at whatever I do. And my grandpa led that life. The other thing my grandpa did, he lived off the land, right? So cooking any of the above, whether it's possum, rabbits, deer, coon, nutria, squirrels. Even my uncle, when he came by my house and I told him I had some baby rabbits, he's like, I'll be back to get those. I want the little ones, not the big ones. The gamey foods, right? And in my mom's side, mostly domestic service, and my mom was like, no. But this is how he lived. Like, I heard that my grandpa would always barbecue and cook things in the backyard. My grandma made homemade peach brandy wine, and they had like home garden with vegetables. And I'm guilty of one of those. I won't say which one. One of those. And I don't have a green thumb. You'll figure out the rest. But that was their life, right? To come from the plantation to get to this point, that's what family weekends look like. Grandpa, I guess because of the peach brandy wine, went out with some relatives, and I found that they had a car accident on March 18, 1962 on Louisa and Florida Avenue, and they snapped a utility pole. I never did that. And that is the crash. And all of these things I just found on Genealogy Bank, looking up my grandpa. Heard about the story from my dad, but he walked away from that. Until this moment, on February 23rd, 1975, when they were on Jackson Avenue, and he was hanging out with my parents for drinks. My dad and my mom went home to the lower 9, and they got a phone call saying my grandfather was killed. So at 4 a.m., my grandfather was shot in the neck at La Harpe and North Robinson Street. And there's 2 pages to this story. It's in the big binder. Long story short, I can't give you all the details. I just know based on what they know, he was walking somewhere. When I read the article, read everything else attached to it, it said that my grandfather walked down the street, made it to a certain door, knocked on the door and collapsed, where he died. Here's his death certificate. Shows that he was living in New Orleans, 5554 Providence Street. Lists his parents' names, my grandma's name, ruled as a homicide, and he's buried in Providence Park in Kenner. And that's all I have. Questions?
Thank you so much, Gaynell. Here, let me, I will walk it to you.
Okay.
We were going to start with one from the audience and one from Zoom. So y'all start putting your questions in Zoom. Yes.
Hello, my name is Sterling Henry III. I have a question about your grandfather's service.
Mhm.
What first question is, was he drafted or what did he volunteer?
Volunteer.
Volunteered. And what position did he have during the service or under what unit?
All I know is that he was in a decontamination unit. I have more details on the service, is in that binder over there, but I don't know the full details. When I contacted the National Archives, I was told that there was a fire
Mhm.
and a lot of my grandfather's records were destroyed. And so sometimes that happens, but on the flip side, also my husband contacted the National Archives for his 3rd great grandfather's Civil War records,
Mhm.
and it was like 63 pages.
Yeah,
It's hit or miss.
it's hit or miss. Okay.
And so unfortunately, a lot of those details, some of them I'll never know,
Yeah.
but I won't stop looking.
So, okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, what do you think it will be? You said he was also interested as a truck driver. Was he also part of the Red Bull Express during that time frame, or?
Not that I know of.
Nothing, no?
Not that I know of. For the most part, to my understanding, he just pretty much worked in that decontamination unit,
Okay.
dealing with chemical cleanup.
Okay, that's.
Yeah, that Red Bull Express would have been cool. Red Bull Express would have been cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
Okay.
not that grandfather.
No. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We don't have any questions from Zoom yet. So if anybody else has any questions or comments? Sorry.
Which DNA test did you use?
So I use Ancestry,
Oh, did you?
DNA testing, Ancestry or 23andMe are both great, but I wanted to connect my results to my family tree.
Okay.
So I use Ancestry.
And do you get notifications from Ancestry about this relative or that
Oh,
relative?
yeah,
Okay.
I'm the relative that you don't want to call you and tell you about results, because that means I know something.
Mhm.
Like in the past year, I probably found 4 cousins, new cousins, and they were my cousin's children that they didn't claim. So even if you don't take a DNA test, your information can still get out there because your relatives are tested. And the more people test, the better your results.
I have 2 grandfathers who were in World War II. One of them came home and used his GI Bill to become a furniture reupholstery person. The other one got his high school diploma and then got some additional training and eventually ended up as a employee of big airline in the 80s, is escaping me right now, but did really well for that and ended up working at NASA. Do you know if your grandfather had GI Bill benefits and what he did with them?
My dad could probably answer that better than I can.
He had GI benefit, because the first thing I heard about my dad, he took his benefits and bought 2 houses on Cleary Street. You know what I'm saying? And back then, them houses might have been about $1,500 a piece. But he bought two of them. He always was somebody that know which way to go about to give him, you know, money always followed him. So he whatever had benefits, trust me, he got all his benefits. And he did buy a house with him on Clewitt Street. Cause I was telling some people one day, I say, cause they be telling me, you must have took after your dad every time I see you buying property. But property don't never get old. And when they get old, it's time to go. You know, so that's how my dad's father done it. And I always used to hang with him. I was bigger than my dad. You know what I mean? My daddy was small. And I mean, we used to go out on Jefferson Path to a casino. And that's where he get some of that from. My little grandson, he follows your lawnmower. And I always was a person, I don't want to hang with you if you were younger than me. You can't tell me nothing. I want to hang with you if you were older than me. And we used to be somewhere everywhere, but my dad had got so many benefits. Know what else I know he did? He went to baking school. Somewhere in New Orleans used to have a baking school. But I mean, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, sisters, they had Esau's in there. Bread rides and all, you got to put it up high. So they ain't had no modern stuff like we got. Microwaves and all that. They had microwaves. You put it up there and wave at it. And that was the microwave. And the rides, we used to see all kind of homemade stuff and were healthy as we could be. Now you go to the store and you buy a donut, you might get cancer. It's true. That came on to me when we got married 50 years ago. Me and my wife be 50 years in April. I went to baking and cooking. Oh, these donuts, these biscuits, they better than other kind. We used to have, she'll tell you, we used to have ancient age biscuits. One biscuit lasts a week. The peach off it and get full, you know?
And the cookies.
And it was better things. Right now, it's modern and everything is press a button.
Yeah.
Press a button. They had all that. Then you had the home, if they got their benefits, it wasn't a whole lot of money like now. Cause my little brother just got his benefit from R&D. From the Army. The people who call that old R&D stuff, 200 and some thousand now.
Really?
You see what I'm saying? Now, my daddy would have got that, it might have been $250. But 250 back then, the 40s and 50s, you were rich. If you knew how to handle
No
your
question.
money.
Ooh, I'm gonna come on up.
Like when we first came back home.
There is. Gaynell was pointing at, yes.
Yeah, could you summarize how Cary Clifford became Kelly Banks again?
Good question. When you find out, you tell me.
You don't
It's
know?
seriously, like, I don't know. Like, if you think about it, in the 1930s, his name on that census was Cary Clifford. And then when we saw him on the documents in 1942, Kelly Banks. But because my dad told me my grandmother used to call my grandfather Cary. So again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times African Americans, we changed our names for a reason. We would do it today if we could get away with it. Things are a little different now. I've known of cases with African American genealogy where people would change their entire name, date of birth, because of a crime that was committed or to escape, right? Like, if a lot of times people think that 1865 emancipation happened, new life. It didn't. They had to keep living and they had to get out of situations such as lynching. I know one of his wife's uncles was killed in Glynn. And to be honest, if my grandfather would have stayed with his mentality, aka my mentality, he would have been killed in Glynn. And so a lot of times, even with those name changes, we'll never know.
Kristen says, it is so common to hear that World War II veterans did not talk very much about their time in the war. How much of that was true for your grandfather? And how did that affect you in learning about his story?
Great question, Kristen. Full disclosure, Dr. Kristen Burton and I worked together at the National World War II Museum. Kristen, like, my knowledge about my grandfather is pretty much limited to what my dad knows or what I can find documentation of. some of the stories that, like you heard my dad talking about in terms of his life being different in the military, I don't think he went in depth about that. Did he, Dad? Did Grandpa go in depth about his stories? About, yeah. And that's kind of like what Kristen is saying. It's similar to, I remember with my mom's mom, I used to go to Grandma and I would have questions about her family. And I would, start off, I was very young. I would say, Grandma, well, you're a slave now. But your mom would say, no, Grandma, no. And it's literally because sometimes, just sometimes, it's too painful to talk about. Or sometimes a child was told to stay in a child's place and they just didn't know. So with my grandfather, I don't know what he experienced in World War II. And some of it, Kristen, unless we tag team some research, I don't think that we can figure that out.
Or you choose.
It doesn't.
I just wanted to know, as a genealogist, what were your top 3 resources in putting together your grandfather's story?
Top 3, my dad's my first source. And then some conversations with my uncle as well. Next would be like federal census documents, combined with visiting Glynn. Third, you wouldn't believe it, gut. My gut, right? Like that is my grandfather. So he's embedded in me. So a lot of things I'll think it. And then when I start digging, it's like, I was right. And I know that's a higher calling. That's not something I can figure out.
Just a quick follow-up then. Where did you go digging?
Oh, so Ancestry, Family Search, Fold 3, Genealogy Bank. Those are my top ones. As you could tell, National Archives as well, filling out those forms, and oral history, if you could find somebody. Like right now, so many of us are embedded into social media that we're not doing the stuffs that will leave a paper trail other than social media. And then the way that these sites are being bought left and right, I wouldn't trust my family story to be taken care of on there because it's here today, could be gone tomorrow. So George, I don't know anything about George other than I was told that George moved to California. That's my half uncle. George King.
That was the grandmother's child.
No, so that child's name, oh gosh, what's his name? Kelly Banks Jr. It's my grandmother's child. It's my grandmother's child. And it's my uncle. I tell people all the time, the way I grew up, your halves was your wholes. Right? And yeah, it's my grandma's child. Yes.
The name of the airlines was Pan Am.
Yeah. Yes.
Number 2, I didn't notice religious records in there. You didn't.
So inside of that Civilian Conservation Corps document, the one thing that I saw, which matches what I saw when I was in Glynn, it said that my grandfather went to school at St. Mark's, but St. Mark's was the church. And I knew that that was the family church. The family cemetery is right next to it. It's right on the little road that leads to Glenwood Plantation. St. Mark's Church is still standing. Cemetery is still there. And up until 2 years ago, the ballroom was still standing too.
And my third thing is, my grandfather died in 2011. And just before he died, one of my cousins and I sat down and did his best generation interview. And that was totally enlightening for finding out what his experience in World War II was, because we had never discussed it. And what we found was absolutely delightful. He had enlisted with his older brother. He dropped out of high school to do it. And just before they were leaving, his older brother leaned in on a car window and tore the tendons in his hand when he broke the glass. So he was not allowed to go. At 16, my grandfather went on his own and he ended up as an ice cream maker in Ireland. And he would go to London on the weekends and deliver ice cream. And he ran into a military buddy years and years later, and they called him Ice Cream. He also, with his Pan Am benefits, took a bunch of his 11 children to France, where we found out that he could still speak French from learning it when he was in the United States Army. So
You
amazing.
received the gift, the fact that he was still alive. Like my dad's dad was killed in 75. My mom's brother died in what, 82, 83. So I didn't have, a person to talk to. Now, working at the World War II Museum, I was able to hang out with a lot of the people who were there. I spent some time talking to Mr. Brooks. He was one of the oldest veterans. And so I got to spend some time with him. I still think there's a family tie there because his family was living with some Londons in Clinton, Louisiana. And my second great grandmother is a London from Clinton, Louisiana. But that's the importance of talking. You just took us right back to where I started. That's the importance of talking to people while they're still here and getting them to tell their stories. If you don't do anything else this year, do what she did. Get the stories now. And it doesn't really matter the ages. Like I can say was that 2021, I lost 3 of my genealogy buddies in 1 year. 3. So Sal Cerio, Anita, and my Uncle Clay. And I'll leave you there.
We have a lot of thank yous. We have a lot of thank you for a great presentation.
You're welcome.
And yeah, and thank you all.
Thank you all for
very
coming
much
and
for
sharing.
today. Yes,
Right? Because we
yes.
learn from each other. And that's the way that we grow. Yes.
There is a good book called Half American by Matthew. You read it? It talks about African Americans in World War II. Half American, Matthew Belmont. One other question. When your grandfather bought the houses, did he buy them or did someone else buy them and sell? Because my grandfather bought our house in 1934, but someone else bought it and then sold it to him 2 days later. But I think that what happened was it was uptown, and I don't think they were going to sell it to a man installer.
Because they had those
Another layer.
ordinances.
On Courier Street back in the 40s, late 40s.
Yeah.
That was the first set of houses they ever built for soldiers when they got out to Army.
Yeah.
Like Pontchartrain Park was the only second subdivision for black people.
Yeah.
They say that was the first one, but that's the second. Louisiana Street was the first, behind Louisiana Street. The house was tall off the ground. They were selling that to them soldiers as they got out to service.
Profit me.
So happened, whatever little back pay from that GI Bill and all that stuff.
Yeah.
He bought 2 of them. They were cheap, like I said back then. They were real cheap, but they had, then after they built Louisa, then Seabrook. Y'all heard of Seabrook? All the miles in Seabrook, gathered up a bunch of them for the soldiers that were coming through Camp Leroy Jones. Then Pontchartrain Park. Now, I don't know where they're finna build a few now, but every time a batch of soldiers come out, they have a batch of subdivisions to get built.
Yeah.
And then they have first they put African American soldier. When I got out the service, I guess they were glad for me to get out. They would have gave me cat eyes and everything. I didn't worry about it. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted out. Because in the service is one thing, because I heard y'all were talking about what went on in there. I think the soldiers who went through there in the 30s and 40s, man, they had a lot of mother-winning common sense. The soldiers that went through there with me in the 60s and 70s, they wasn't taking nothing from nobody. I don't need mother. Yeah. You're gonna do it my way, you know what I mean? Because it ain't changed. Yeah. Only thing changed in the world is time, dates. But you're going there right tomorrow with the same old crazy stuff. All our people, soldiers and captains and majors and general, what are you? PFC top. Yeah. Now my youngest brother was a sergeant, him and the other one. But you know what you gotta do to become a sergeant? I'm telling y'all the truth. Now some people ain't gotta do nothing. But you gotta work hard, think hard, and keep a lot of toothpaste with you because you're gonna do a lot of tailgate. Not me. You let me be private 3 or private 1. I'm still Reverend Charles today, huh? Yeah. Some things they can't change, can't stop, and some things we can't change. So you work with us, then you move on. I know I couldn't change the home. I do my little time and get out the home, just to say I went in it. I like adventure. I try anything just to see what all going on about it. And I think that's how my fault was. He didn't go to school, but if you met him, you'd think he was a professor. But it's something his mama and them must were feeding it to him. You know what I mean? Because they had people back then used to say, you was here before, boy. You been here before, boy. Look at all that stuff you know. But I make furniture, cabinets, I could look at something one time and duplicate it. Just like my son, he could look at something, traveling book. But everybody, what I really am, I'm a teacher. I teach people, train them how to make cabinets, build houses. But I always so tell them, they graduate today, do me a favor. Don't be like me. Be better than me. Ain't no two nothing alike. You take him right there, that's getting out, son, he can build a house. Him right there. Throw the wood in front of him and he'll show you what a roof look like and what this look like. Give him the tape measure and tell him, Benjamin, how long is it? He'll tell you, he quick learning. In the late generation, but then you just gotta, I think you gonna be whatever your parents was to show you what they was. But some parents, like I tell people, children, a lot of training some of everybody, children. Don't do what you see other people do. It might be blessed to do that. It might be lucky. You're either lucky or blessed.
We do
And
have
the one trying to do it may not be so lucky.
Cassandra. Okay, I got.
So, I showed you guys St. Mark Cemetery, right? So down the road, across the street, my great aunt Alice and her uncle Joe, her husband Joe Bradley, they owned Dewdrop Inn. So, Uncle Joe was killed, but Aunt Alice kept running the Dewdrop Inn. And recently, within the past month or so, I bought the name Joe Bradley Dewdrop Inn. The original Dewdrop Inn was torn down. I didn't know it was getting torn down, but it was. Mama Bell is the reason this business exists. Mama Bell is my second great grandmother. She died in New Orleans in 1971, born in 1888. Married her husband, Alex. They both died the same year. When I looked up my mom's side of the story, I saw that there were a lot of domestic servants, a lot of women who were called Mammy. But she wasn't. The women I read about, and their stories are equally as powerful as Grandpa Kelly's. The things that these women accomplished together, I had to do something. Again, I have a museum background. I don't see their stories on the wall. I've worked for many of our major museums in Louisiana. Their stories are not there. So I thought to myself, I knew that my ancestors, some of these women were called Mammy, right? I did presentations on Mama Bell, found some of the descendants of the people where Mama Bell worked. Great friends today. Anyway, long story short, the thing came to my mind, or I call it my cross that I have to carry, is I have to take this word and show you who these women really were. And that's how we got Mammy. That's how we got our Mammies, long story short. Who? Mama Bell's from my mom's side. So it started with them. It started with that long line of domestic servants going all the way back to a document I found that listed them on this document with the entire family being valued at $1,800. And seeing that one document, that one will, with two of my grandmothers on there, with $500 attached to one of their names and $150 to the other, my fifth and fourth grandma, I had to do something to make people remember their names. And so Mama Bell's story lives at the public library. Because of that, I'm a champion for Holt Cemetery. I've done presentations on Holt Cemetery. I've done a lot of research on Holt Cemetery. Hopefully within the next year or so, I'll have a Friends of Holt Cemetery group where I will raise money to preserve the cemetery. So it just doesn't stop with our Mammies. It also stops with preserving their stories, preserving the places where they're resting, and giving them all the proper due they deserve. So that's why I do what I do. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
And it made me think about a lot of things in my family.
Mhm.
We grew up in 7
Mhm.
and everybody lived in the same neighborhood.
Yes.
Went to the rural land.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's one way of staying connected.
Yes.
You know, we would walk maybe 2-3 blocks to get to one cousin.
Yes.
Block to another,
Yes.
but we knew we were all in that same circle.
Exactly.
And it was so many of us, and now we're so dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they have their own families, and now they're into, you know, their own second generation.
Mm-hmm.
But I always enjoyed history. I always enjoyed living. I got to, my great grandmother on my mom's side, I got to get to know her. And she didn't share too much. She was very stern and quiet. But one thing I can remember about her is that she would tell you, don't chew your cabbage twice. Say what you have to say. So to me, that was very powerful.
I'll steal that
Yeah.
and use it. I'll borrow it.
Uh,
I'll give it back if you need it, but yeah.
And my dad's parents passed before I was reached 10 too, so I'm sorry I lost a lot of that history. And my mom passed this year, and we didn't get a chance to really talk with her about her life. But you know, you hear bits and pieces of little things that happened when they were growing up. But I enjoyed listening to whatever I was able to capture. But when I did genealogy research on my family, and I was looking at birth certificates, the spelling was always so weird. I guess they tried to spell the name the way it sounds. And that was distressing to me. So, but I mean, that was like back then. But yeah, it was nice to just see that history. And I did pull some census records. And I want to go back and just do a little more.
That's it. Take a person at a time and just go all the way in. Use genealogy bank. Is that free through the library?
Yeah, it's called New Orleans newspapers,
Yep.
but it's available on, actually, you don't have to be on the 3rd floor. No, we have, you just need your library card. It's in the databases. Let me, give you this. But basically, like, if you go to nolalibrary.org and you go to research and learn and databases, we have New Orleans newspapers, and that's genealogy bank. That's genealogy bank at the library. We also have Heritage Quest, which is Ancestry Light. You can do that at home. Oh, it is. I mean, right? Like, because you got the census, you got the directories, you got the big ones, you
It's a
know, and you also
start.
have the Freedmen's Bureau, which that is unique to
Yep.
Heritage Quest. But, you know, it's a good place. Like, you can come into any of the public libraries and hook onto their Wi-Fi to do Ancestry proper, like full Ancestry. You do have access to that. Like, you can come to a library, any of the 14 branches, or hook into their Wi-Fi and do Ancestry for free. What you can also do now is we are now a Family Search affiliate. So you can also come, we are a Family Search affiliate now, so you can come to any library branch or hook into the Wi-Fi. Or, you know, if you really want to like get the full like guide, come to the archives at the city archives at the main library. We're always open. I've got cards for us right here.
Yes.
But
Family Search is affiliate.
so what that means is Family Search has a whole lot of digitized records that are just image only. They're not necessarily fully text searchable, but they have hundreds, thousands, if not millions.
Swipe.
And what a lot of records are is when you're on Family Search at home, you know this.
Yeah.
You see the little camera next to a collection, but it has an X through it. And it's like, oh, you can't access that when you're at home. But if you come into any of the New Orleans public libraries or hop on our Wi-Fi, you sit in your car and hop on the Wi-Fi, whatever. But you know, come in, please. You can access all those collections that were a camera crossed out.
And just don't take the second floor.
Okay, good. Oh, we have so many questions. Yes.
But that also work, say, in the university libraries.
They're not, to my knowledge, the universities are not Family Search
Restricted.
affiliates, unfortunately. And I don't think Jefferson Parish is yet either, but St. Tammany Parish is an affiliate, so you could do it in St. Tammany. I don't know what each university is going to have a different set of subscriptions. They have like Newsbank, but I'm not sure entirely what Newsbank scope they have.
I know when I research, I think their access is increased significantly.
But yes.
Okay, quick question. I really liked when you said document your story. And I also want to go back to a friend of mine told me, well, this is a young woman. She's like in her 20s, but she says that like about 8 years ago, one of her teachers said, go to your grandparents, one of your grandparents, and ask them about, you know, their story. And she did. Her grandmother was in an assisted living facility, and she asked her grandmother to tell her, you know, her stories. She wrote it all down. She made a film about it.
Wow.
And
Next level.
the thing is that if we could get our educators to make that part of their, you know, the students' homework, you know, like a project or something, that would be so wonderful, because then we could all let them know our stories besides writing our own, because sometimes they might have different questions, things that we might think of writing down. But, you know, I was just really impressed by.
For the past 2 or 3 years, I've been going to Carver High School, and I meet with the teachers there, and then I do basically some of this with the kids. The only difference is I use my ancestry subscription to let them look up their grandparents on the census documents, and then give them family tree things to take home. And I'm hoping that it'll spark that little thing that they need to talk to the people now. In addition to that, I'll also be at the Louisiana Social Studies Teacher Conference doing a presentation. Not sure which side of the family I'll pick for that one, but I'll advocate for the very thing that you're talking about, because history is easier to understand when you could put your own story into it. So I totally get what you're saying. I'm hoping that I'll be able to drive that message home. I'll be doing a presentation there. And in addition to that, I have a program called Genealogy Sleuthing, and it's for parents, grandparents, and children to come to an event together. And that's when I do similar things, but in a different way, so that it'll appeal to younger generations. So I'll be doing that in Mobile, Alabama next Saturday, but I hop around doing it. Just did a similar thing. Actually, I did this story in Alexandria last Saturday. So again, a room full of different age people coming together to start documenting their stories. I always tell people, bring a genealogy buddy, bring a younger person with you, so that you'll have somebody to hand that information over. It's one thing to research all of this stuff, but then, as Dr. Antoinette Harrell always says, what are you gonna do with it when you're done? And me, I know I probably have to give all of mine away to the libraries or universities, because my kids will have my stuff on eBay. So yes.
I just, I was always a camper and backpacker, because they parts for all the civilian conservation for people build things. And so I always think of kids going away from home. But so he probably, if they were paid in store money before and got government cash, doing the same work he was doing in Glynn, wised up and said, I'm gonna go enlist.
Yes, and he did. I saw that he was working at a forest. Oh God, what is it called? It's in Louisiana. I can't think of the name of it right now, but which one? Yep, that's where he worked. Forest clearing at that park. I have not been there. I was tempted to get my husband to take me there last weekend when I was up in Alexandria, but he was like, you have to go somewhere else. The next day we got to go home.
But he, from what you showed, he worked on the plantation.
Yes, he did.
Civilian conservation course. So he's probably making more money through the CCC than the plantation on the plantation.
I don't think he was making any money on a plantation, to be honest. Like, they live pretty much in the quarters. If he was making anything, probably was a meal.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
I went to Camp Claiborne for my season project for the 761st Tank Battalion. So before that, they were a CCT camp, and they really explained the differences between these camps and how that was really important for the people to gain money outside of family, and how they could actually dealing with the Great Depression, and in Louisiana, which is even worse, like a poor state, can't be poor, so they probably got concentration traps and all that. But then I remember the Thibodeau massacre.
Yes.
That's because I went to school in Nichols, and they make a point to tell people about the Thibodeau massacre. That how that was the key part of the massacre was the script payment, and how they were sick of being paid coupon money, as and that was a key part of it. Then they stopped. That's right. They changed. They actually eventually paid people after the massacre, but it was a kid. Your grandpa started to remind me of those events.
Yes.
And and all enough in the prisoner camps.
Yes.
I have professors who's they were descended from prisoner camps. From German prisoner camps within Louisiana, and how they would actually said they treated them relatively well. So they brought that to their kids, and their kids moved to Louisiana, but the same type of work continuously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the cool thing about like genealogy. Like we have some similarities in our stories. Sometimes they're intertwined. Most of the time we're interconnected, but there are some variances, right? Like that's the cool thing about it. Like each person we could pull on our family tree will have a very different experience or story. So that's what I love about it.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the
you.
excellent discussion. Thank you for doing this, Gaynell, always.
You're welcome.
It's always like so informative. And I love that what you do is you take us through the genealogy journey in both like an instructional and like a relational way. Like you tell a story, but you also literally tell people exactly what they need to do to find their own.
That's the goal. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.